Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the row that broke earlier this week between Boris Johnson's office and that of his supposedly independent ethics advisor, who doesn't seem impressed with the fact that he is neither independent nor being listened to on matters of ethics. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news in politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So before I get onto the fireworks with Johnson's ethics advisor, who isn't at all happy with being with all the unethical behaviour from his boss, I have to start with this. So on Wednesday, this footage outside the Cabinet Office. Bloke from Sainsbury's bringing in several crates of groceries, but with like Prosecco on top there. And you can see that they opened the door and security let him in, helped him in fact. Then later on, the Cabinet Office said, oh, this order was a mistake. It was actually intended for a different non-government address. Oh, I thought it had to do with the government. And you can imagine the scene. Guy from Sainsbury's brings the Cabinet Office booze. Just a week after the Sue Gray report attacked the culture of boozing under Johnson's leadership. So he gets inside. Oh, nobody saw you, did they? Well, there was a camera crew outside filming. Oh, no. So the Cabinet Office then said it was a mistaken order. So let's get this straight. The Cabinet Office is one of the most secure parts of the UK. It's where top secret meetings take place. At any one time, you might have the Prime Minister, the most senior leaders of our military, as well as other senior members of government, all in the same room within that building. Do you really think they're lax with security there? Are they seriously trying to tell us that a bloke can just knock on the door and be let in with a load of crates that they weren't expecting? And what's more, they just opened the door for him and let it all in without checking any paperwork? No, they were expecting it. Don't be ridiculous. They were expecting it. What they weren't expecting was to be filmed. And I'm not starting with this because it's amusing. It is. But because it shows the culture that now exists at the heart of government under Boris Johnson's leadership. A damning report comes out into the culture of booziness at work in government departments. Never mind the illegal nature of them during lockdown. Sue Gray attacks them as unprofessional and damaging even when legal. After a report was published, we're supposed to believe there was a period of reflection, introspection, and that the culture is going to change. They've realised, actually, yeah, we shouldn't be doing this. Not a week later, we see multiple bottles of wine being taken to the Cabinet Office. Do we really believe the same thing isn't happening in Downing Street as well? They'll just be making sure they hide it in suitcases like they did before to avoid being found out. And then when they're caught, they lied about it as if anyone who understands what the Cabinet Office even is would believe it. Nothing's changing, and nothing's going to change while Boris Johnson remains in charge. Which brings me on to the silly sod who agreed to be Johnson's ethics advisor after the last one resigned due to deeply unethical behaviour. In that case, Priti Patel being found guilty of bullying and not being sacked. So Johnson's current ethics advisor, Lord Geidt, had already taken a massive dump on his own reputation over the Downing Street flat redecoration scandal. Evidence emerged that Boris Johnson had broken the rules in eliciting donations to cover the redecoration and kept it all hushed up. Do you remember that? Back in the days before Partygate, Geidt carried out an investigation which did not include gathering actual evidence. Instead, he just asked the Prime Minister some questions. The Prime Minister lied in his responses, and Geidt exonerated him on the basis of statements made by the only person I know of who has been sacked for lying both as a journalist and a government minister. Later on, the Electoral Commission, which was independent back then, carried out a proper investigation where they did gather evidence and found messages which proved that Boris Johnson lied about the matter to both Parliament and Lord Geidt. Geidt was made to look a proper Charlie, so carried out another review, but still came to the same conclusion, presumably because he was in too deep. After that, it went a bit quiet. In truth, an ethics advisor should not need to be in the news that often, because if the government takes their advice to heart, scandals are avoided. But then Boris Johnson rewrote the Ministerial Code. Now, I may have mentioned this in passing, but just to be clear, people, including myself, jumped to the conclusion that he'd watered down the consequences for various acts of wrongdoing, including lying. Now, Although there is an element of that in the revision, certainly, although it doesn't really affect the line in Parliament, it makes no practical difference either. As argued by constitutional legal expert David Allen Green, the Ministerial Code is basically worthless. Of all the things that Johnson has done to make a fuss about, this is not one of them. It doesn't matter that Johnson has changed some of the content. It doesn't matter that he's watered it down. The Ministerial Code was always a document which existed to make people think that there are standards in government. But ultimately, it was always for the Prime Minister to decide. This has been the case for the 5 Prime Ministers who have adopted the code. It's just that Boris Johnson failed to take it seriously. But there's no independent oversight into standards. Angela Rayner, Labour's deputy leader, has called for an ethics committee. And I suppose this would work like the standards committee for MPs, only specifically for ministers. Something will have to emerge. I don't believe anything will really change much. Consider how the Ministerial Code came about in the first place. 30 years ago, the last Tory government were coming to the end and Tory sleaze was becoming an issue. Perhaps it's just what happens when they've been in power too long. John Major, Prime Minister at the time, could see that it was eroding the trust of the public, so he adopted the so-called Nolan Principles. 7 standards for public life: selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty and leadership. Then Tony Blair, when he became Prime Minister, incorporated them into a ministerial code to let people know that those at the highest level of public office were also expected to be bound by the same principles. But the system was always worthless if the Prime Minister refused to follow the code themselves. Something will have to happen though. Johnson doesn't care if the public don't trust politicians. As Starmer said a while ago, it suits Boris Johnson that people think all politicians are as bad as each other. It does. It's true. Johnson is one of the most dishonest of all politicians, if not the most dishonest. So of course it's in his interest for people to think that all politicians are just as bad. But one day we will have a Prime Minister who doesn't benefit from that public attitude, who needs the public trust, and they will need to change something to earn it back. Maybe an ethics committee will be what emerges. The problem is that, as Johnson has shown, there's nothing that is independent that cannot be stopped from being independent. Boris Johnson's government have politicised the Met Police. They've taken control of the Electoral Commission. They've tried to abolish the Standards Committee. They actually succeeded, but the public backlash forced them to U-turn. If the public had let him get away with it, that would be gone now. The vote was already passed in the Commons to abolish it before the public showed their displeasure, and then they had to quickly reinstate it. Channel 4's been privatised in order to destroy the editorial independence of Channel 4 News, which has been critical of Boris Johnson. The BBC News long since lost its editorial independence. I'm going to be talking, it was in the video earlier today, trying to get the schedule in my head. So where Boris Johnson yesterday was booed as he went into St Paul's, and the live BBC coverage, the commentators go, oh, there's a lot of boos there, that's a lot of boos. But when the BBC published it on their news website, it wasn't boos then, it was a mixed reaction. There was a mix of cheers and boos. The Tory manifesto even talked about removing the independence of our courts. This process has now partly begun. There's nothing that is independent that cannot have that independence removed by a corrupt government. So whatever system emerges, it will only exist as a placebo, something that gives the public confidence that standards have returned. But those standards will only have returned for as long as a Prime Minister wants those standards in place. Whatever system emerges, it will only work while the government of the day respects it. We've got a lot of problems with our democracy in the UK. I think David Cameron was actually the first to expose major failings. We talk about Johnson's lies, but Cameron would frequently tell lies as well. And I don't mean spin. I don't mean, presenting statistics in a sort of factually true but misleading way. He was regularly admonished by the Office for National Statistics for just making shit up. But one massive failing we have is a lack of separation of powers. People keep saying, Phil, we need a codified constitution. No, we don't. Didn't help America, did it? And it won't help us. What we need is the separation of powers. Now, that is also a constitutional reform, but that's what's needed. We need public bodies who have oversight over the government who cannot be corrupted by that government. We need independence of these bodies that cannot be taken away by the government. Yes, those bodies need oversight, but it mustn't be oversight from people that are either part of the government or could be nobbled by government. As for Lord Geidt, the current ethics advisor, he has basically said in his letter in the last week that Johnson has broken his own ministerial code and should resign. Johnson won't. So if Geidt wants to retain any credibility at all, he has to resign because his job is impossible now. Johnson makes the job of an ethics advisor completely impossible. Geidt should have resigned a long time ago. But if he doesn't now, he'll have no honour left. And what's more, anyone who now takes up that position, knowing what they know, will also have no honour. Because when Geidt took over after the predecessor resigned over a failure of Boris Johnson to apply the Ministerial Code, that was one thing. He could have gone in believing that he could help reform the system. Now he must know that that's impossible, and so must any successor. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. Maybe even click on the join button if you're interested in memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.